from Marlborough and Lancaster, and that is of course in the United Kingdom, are the places where a delegation of Ugandan leaders, then the likes of Ben Chiwanuka, Apollo Milton Obote, among others, went to negotiate for Uganda's independence. But of course, this came at the backdrop of resistance and struggle. You may recall the Bataka Party or the Kangave Musazi group that continuously were agitating against colonial rule and the policies around land, trade, among other things. And in 1962, this independence was eventually granted. The Union Jack was lowered down and the Ugandan flag raised high, and the national anthem sung for the very first time on that particular day. Today we convene as young people to discuss 62 years down the road. What is our political trajectory like? What's our human rights progress like? The economy that has grown in a steadfast manner. We are here to evaluate all that and much more. Viewers, karibu sana to the Youth Roundtable, and of course, happy Independence Week and month. I'm joined by a panel of distinguished young people to put this topic into perspective, and in no particular order. From my immediate left, which is of course your right, is Comrade Nimrod Kakayi. Nimrod is all the way from the National Resistance Movement Youth League, and also all the way from Namisindwa. Ndugu, we are pleased.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, our viewers and everyone. Nimrod Kakayi, it's always a pleasure to come here to share my views, to speak my mind, but also to join every goodwill Ugandan to celebrate the Independence Month, but also to thank whoever pushed for this day, such celebrations. I mean, the men and women who chose and did everything to push for Ugandan independence. I salute you all. And I'm happy today that we're going to have a very wonderful discussion in regards to the future of this country. Thank you.
Well, we are pleased to know how proud you are about the men and women who put the sweat and hard work to ensure that we attain independence. Next to Nimrod, and the second panelist on the show is a lawyer and also I know a scholar of international and diplomatic relations, Ogir Carlos. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, my brother Moses. It's a pleasure being with my brother Nimrod on this platform, but also to you, the viewers. I'm very privileged to always be here, and I'm looking forward to a very beautiful discussion. I also want to extensively wish you a happy independence celebration.
All right, well, let's just begin right away. And maybe I know we are history at times bores us, but it's important that we track this journey right from maybe just in a word or two, the pre-1962 events, but also because you see at times, whereas we want to avoid those events, is that they contribute towards the national DNA of our country. Because, and yeah, let me just not preempt it. Okay, let me just begin with you. Like, historically speaking, just lay for us a journey from where we have come, just not in detail, but just snippets of how we have come.
Yeah, thank you, comrade. Uganda has a very rich history, and we have come from a very interesting background, colonial heritage, and Uganda being a very diverse community, diverse in terms of a lot of different denominations and different affiliations, different tribes within the country. We happen to be under the colonial influence of the British. So since the 1980s and coming to 1800, and Uganda, particularly Buganda, was the biggest influence Uganda had. And the history of Uganda tells us that the Buganda Kingdom is also prominent for the name of the country, Uganda. So the Buganda Kingdom became the protectorate of the British and the different leaderships by then, the Kabaka. And when the British came to Uganda, the Buganda people were the first to receive the British. However, there was a lot of resistance by then. You look at tribes like the Banyoro and etc. So I could say the struggle to independence was a mixture of a lot of interactions which were in most cases resistant, and it tells you the reason why there was a lot of exiling, there was a lot of fights and all that. So till then, when Uganda gained independence in 1962, it was a coalition government between the Kakayi and the UPC led by Apollo Milton Obote, who was later on then deemed as the prime minister, and Kakayi presented the Kabaka Mutesa, who was the first president of Uganda. Ceremonial role, I could say. So from the time of independence to where we are now, Uganda has experienced a lot of, I could call them experiences, not necessarily only challenges, because from 1962 to the election of Obote as a president, as a prime minister, then Mutesa, we have seen changes in regimes, and so far we have had, Uganda as a country has had over 9 presidents exchanging hands. However,
but also notice that none has been...
Yeah, however, the important point on that is that none of the 9 presidents have actually come through a very, I could say, in a very democratic way, because Uganda has been characterized by a lot of military takeovers and coup d'etats. But a small relation to that is that I blame this first on the colonial heritage set, because what was the purpose of the creation of the military? The military was created by the colonial masters to protect and defend themselves from the people.
The King's African Rifle.
Yeah, so the African people who were supposed to be protected by the very military were actually being shielded by the military to protect the colonial masters. So this laid a weak foundation for the democratization of Uganda. And it tells you the reason why Apollo Milton Obote was later on overthrown by his chief of staff, Idi Amin, in 1971. And it came to 1979 when Amin, after provoking a lot of issues within the region with Tanzania, then he was got out of power. Then it sees the first establishment of an election after Amin was got off power in 1980. So in 1980, when we got out of Amin's regime, of course, Amin's regime, I cannot forget to mention the expulsion of the Indians, the torture and torment of intellectuals, and etc. So in 1980, when we have the election taking place, that was also a very rigged election, I could say, very undemocratic, that introduced Obote again in power.
Obote too.
Yeah, Obote too. So when Obote too comes to power, in 1980 now we started seeing revolutionaries like President Museveni, who is the current president, and so many others who were now trying to be in the contest. However, that election actually presented more dissatisfaction than it could have set a precedence for the democratization of Uganda. So it tells you the reason why in 1980, when President Museveni lost the election, and the general, by then, General Tito Okello, later on overthrowing Obote, the president going to the bush was a dissatisfaction from losing an election. So 1986, President Museveni comes. Just to cut the whole history short, in 1986, Uganda starts seeing a sense of direction. It leads to the 1995 establishment of the constitution, which now is what the promulgation that we serve the country lately based on the constitutional provisions that were created in 1995. So from 1995 up to now, in 2000, Uganda introduced what we call the multi-party system. So multi-party system is where we started, 2005. That's when the multi-party system came in, and then 2006 was the first multi-party election that was held in Uganda. So all these processes, we are trying to highlight the democratization of Uganda, which came slowly. However, it is still in the waiting that Ugandans are yet to actually witness a clearly democratically elected president handing over power to another democratically elected president in a very peaceful manner.
Wow, interesting. Nimrod, let me come to you, and I'll give you the same grace, which is to just take us through in your own words.
Yes.
And I could just borrow the words of President Amin sometime where he said, you know, he cannot wait for when Uganda is fully independent. I like there was like so much emphasis on the word fully independent.
Yeah.
Yes, but in your own words, just paint for us a picture of our journey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Comrade Carlos. You see, from 18s, when the British chose Uganda as one of their protectorates, you realize that Uganda, before that, there was a system here led by the biggest kingdom, Uganda, which had organized their communities on how to manage society in terms of leadership, in terms of economy, in terms of culture. But due to, I think, our term it as selfish of certain leaders of those different small groups by then, they chose to be confused by small gifts and all that. They end up giving a chance to allow those foreign or colonialists to come and take over management of political affairs, economic affairs, and also even influence their culture, well-being of the society. So from the 18s, when you track the history, you realize that Uganda went through a very tough time. When these people came here, they changed the way we live, the way we lived in our society. For example, I'll go to the economy part that sometimes really pains me. That Ugandans spend their energy, their time, producing raw materials for those countries to be what they are today. But later, I want to just get closer to 19s when few Ugandans who braved and said, no, the enough is enough. We need to make a decision. We need to move. We need to ask that we will get our independence. So when the struggle for independence started, you realize that the contribution of great men on the African continent, you know, the Nyereres, the Nkrumahs, the Mandelas, who chose to support Africans for their full independence until Uganda got its independence in 1962. You learn that before that, the turmoil that the country went through in terms of politics, whereby even here the simple Uchiko was determined by these people to pass the policies that favor them. So meaning Ugandans were every single day waking up to work to better the lives of certain citizens, not themselves, growing coffee, cotton, tea for people who have industries, who have already gone into, I think, the third industrial revolution, when for them they're still at the first, not even the first industrial revolution. So I think, in my opinion, is that it was one of the toughest times for this country. But since independence now, this is where I think my interest starts. Now that all these men, I mean, whenever I remember that, I feel a lot of pain, went through a lot to make sure that you're going to have a semblance of independence, to start a journey of their own, to choose their destination, to choose the destiny of their country. From 1962, there has been a lot of unfortunate events that happened between 1962 and 1986. From the time of the great Mutesa, President Milton Obote, Idi Amin, and those other presidents, you realize that Uganda was not stable. Uganda didn't choose its path by the leaders who I don't know. I recognize them. But their line of ideology is something I've tried to read about so many times. I don't know if it was selfishness, ignorance, or just they didn't know what to do. From the time we got a semblance of independence, I would give you a different other number of states beyond Uganda, that they are 30 years after independence, what happened to their country in terms of economy, in terms of social life, in terms of politics, in terms of culture. That Uganda, immediately after independence, to choose their destiny, we failed. We failed to choose our destiny. We failed to define our purpose as a country. We failed even to set an agenda for our country. And that caused the distress the country went through for the past 30 years of independence. So today, as we kick and celebrate 63 years, I think, in my opinion, we should be celebrating around 40 years.
Of the NRM?
Not of NRM. Of the country having a semblance of destiny, of the country having, a line of development, a line of stability. You look, between the first years of independence, what did the country achieve? We can start looking at the politics. What did we achieve politically?
In fact,
what did we achieve economically?
Post-independence, I think
Yes.
the following year immediately, there was the issue of the lost counties, where there was conflict
The
between
conflict between
Bunyoro
and
Buganda.
and even parts of Somalia about lost counties.
Lost counties. But also, I think, did the constitutional framework then sort of in itself create for us a problem? Because the constitution then, I think, left the Kabaka as the president, then introduced the prime minister, but also, so I think that constitution in itself, I think, also was not
leeway
to conflict, I think.
But I think also the problem of short-sightedness of leaders. You see, what is about the lost counties, when you look at the conflicts that started between those counties, representation and all that, they were not putting Uganda first. Yeah? They were putting their culture, their religion.
Maybe that is what
first.
Maybe that is
the
what
country which had gotten independence.
True, but maybe that is what we are warned about in the report of I forget the name, but there was a report towards independence that said that we are going, yes, as the British, but we're leaving this country in a state where we are not sure it will last, because you've forced them into some sort of border, but but these are different groups. People. So maybe no wonder why shortly after we had issues between Buganda and Bunyoro. But also I think that is a mere excuse, because I think our diversity in culture should in fact be
celebrated.
Exactly.
Yes. And that's what I'm saying. That could be the ideal, is that immediately after that we could start a journey of celebrations. That we are lucky, we have all this arable land, we have all this diverse culture, we have all this religion. It's good. But what happened is totally different, which I'm saying, I wouldn't want to blame on the short-sightedness of those leaders, but also I think the setting of the Britain, the British people who had just chose to set us into that small unit of thinking in a box and all that, and being selfish as leaders. So I was saying that when you examine that before 1986, when you look at the achievements of independence in terms of the economy, in terms of politics, in terms of culture, there was nothing much to celebrate about. There's totally nothing much to celebrate about, because apart from the name independence, literally the same country was determined by foreigners. The politics, you know very well that the return of Obote was not determined by himself. You know very well that Idi Amin was doing things because he was supported by foreigners fully from the Arab part of the world. You know very well that even the first Obote still was supported by fully foreigners. All those leaders who came, their decisions were not based on their thinking. You realize that whatever was happening those first years in every sphere of life, it was still determined by foreigners, by colonizers. Now that after 1986, that's when we start having the relative independence. Why am I saying that? That's when we start growing our institutions, developing our institutions and a nation. You realize that that's the time we start having systems in terms of the constitution that runs the country. Yes, it may have its own challenges, but at least now it is respected and it's there. And it has kept us going for this time.
I agree with what Ogif says about the constitution.
I agree that amendments have been done here and there, but at least we have something to rely on. In terms of tribes, I think there has been a very clear message on sectarianism and tribalistic kind of lifestyle. We know where we stand as a country now. In terms of religion, there is that freedom that every Uganda enjoys, which is given by the constitution. Affiliation that we enjoy as a nation. And that's why I could stand here and say, I think we need to start celebrations from 1986. Because that's the time we have what to celebrate. That's the time we start having
Carlos,
some
Nimrod
fun.
is drawing the line between 1986 up front and 1986.
Because that's the time you realize that that's okay. Because what was independence before 1986? What do we talk about there? The political turmoil, the tribalism, the intolerance of leaders, the failure of state. You realize that we a failed state before 1986. What happened? Education was nowhere to be talked about. Look at the health system. Look at the infrastructure of the country. Nothing. Look at the $3 billion economy, $3 billion economy for the 30 years. What are you talking about before 1980?
At what point did...
But I celebrate
did...
and stand in solidarity with the first men, the Kangavis, who stood and fought for independence in 86, in 62. I stand in solidarity with them. And I feel that these leaders betrayed them. Those who
came after them.
But until the President Museveni came,
do you want to make
in
a rejoinder
1986, as he comes in,
to Kakayi's assertions?
until 1986, when President Museveni came and redeemed this country and stood in solidarity with the men who chose to fight for this country, and that's what we're going to celebrate in Busia today. Thank you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just a rejoinder, but also as you make the rejoinder, is that could you do a comparative analysis? Because I think Tanzania got independence a year prior, or anyway, at about the same time.
Yes, about the same time.
But where did we get off track? Because it seems like if you compare Tanzania today with us in terms of the economy, in terms of, you know, even Kenya itself, where did we go wrong as a country?
Yeah, thank you, my brother Nimrod, for your very good and patriotic submission. I want to agree that NRM deserves a lot of credit. So pronouncing that from 1986 to now there is a lot to outline, I agree with that. However, I also disagree a lot that I could remind you that from 1986 that we had already spent some duration enjoying the independence. I call it enjoying, but it's not really typically enjoying.
I know you cannot stand with that word enjoying.
We had independence, let me say.
Yes.
But in 1986, when the NRM government came to power, the NRM government also faced challenges that it actually could be accountable for. For example, I come from northern Uganda. There was 20 years of civil unrest in northern Uganda. The Joseph Kony War that held the people at ransom, and they were not at their homes. Actually, I could say a normal teenager, okay, maybe now a guy of 25 years, could attest that in their early childhood life, they never understood what it meant to be in a home, because these were people who were living in displacement camps. These were people who were hearing the sounds of the guns every day. So 20 years that happened in the NRM regime.
Yes.
I can also remind you that still under the NRM regime, we have seen atrocities that have happened. For example, go to Kasese. There was that very massive atrocity that happened in Kasese. We have seen a lot of regional imbalances in terms of growth and development until lately when they declared regional cities. Where you see now Lira, Gulu, Jinja, the rest being declared cities. There was a lot of regional imbalance in terms of development, in terms of education and services, hospital and etc. So these are challenges that we cannot close our eyes with one hand and then the other side, you know. So I want to be honest that the NRM coming to power was a breath of fresh air, especially the citizens believed so much in the promises of President Museveni, and it is determined in the first election that was held, I think in '96,
yes,
that President Museveni won massively because that showed the biggest support of Ugandans. However, since then, I could say the promises that, or the things that the NRM government fought against when they were coming to power are starting to reveal in this very regime.
I would want to just seek your indulgence that I think we shall come back here on 26 January to discuss
NRM, precisely.
I beg that now
you see,
we discuss purely.
The challenge is that you cannot
nation,
discuss Uganda's journey without
in isolation of
the NRM.
No, I'm not saying that's why I was saying.
Like,
me, I would
in 62 years, you've been here for 40 years, more than a half of the years. So
that's what I'm saying.
It's impossible to.
Yeah.
I would say we must all first agree that we are discussing vis-a-vis the first 30 years before NRM. That the celebration I'm saying we're going to start, in my opinion, in my heart, I'm starting celebrations from 86 is because that there is nothing we could celebrate in the first 30 years of independence, in terms of politics, in terms of economy, in terms of culture, and you know, self-being. The only reason that I say we should all thank God
At what point were
for
cooperative
86
societies established? Bugisu Cooperative Society,
Yes.
Banyankore, Kwetarana.
I don't have the
What
facts to
period
that.
was that? I think
But
that,
I know it was in existence
that
before
was
86.
prior to 86.
That's true.
And
I agree.
are they there today?
Yes, that's it.
But are they functional?
The discussion of of cooperatives, I think we've had it either on this show or another talk show. It is clear when you're going to talk about the economy. I'm telling you, I've just said here that for the 30 years, the whole GDP of this country was $3 billion. For the first 30 years of independence. Today we're talking about how much? $53 billion. Later, 40 years. So are you going to say we are going to limit it to cooperatives that were in existence, but they were there, but what were they doing for the economy?
Okay, we shall get to
So we shall get to that. But
the
my
economy
argument,
later.
yeah,
I
which I wanted to
hadn't
just,
finished
which I wanted to just add on my brother Carlos is that as we talk about issues that NRM has got, the resurgences, I mean, this government has brought stability. It fought 27 units, groups, including the one that faced northern Uganda. But imagine what was happening in the first 30 years. I mean, we can start breaking it down to the civil wars that were happening, to the unrest that happened. I mean, me, Ogiso, I can tell you that in the first 30 years, we went through a lot. My honest, my grandfathers, great-grandfathers, when they tell you stories of what they went through in pursuit of good life, they couldn't achieve anything. Because, for example, Amin alone destroyed everything we had, including the coffee that we had stored.
You know,
They
comrade,
burnt it. So you cannot, yes, I agree that northern part of this country, including some parts of the country, went through that. But they must have a reason to celebrate now, that this is the only time they're enjoying also independence. They could not, okay, they enjoy independence 30 years before 86. So that's what I'm saying, comrade. We can go.
No, I think what he's saying is that the situation in northern Uganda
Started
became
in the
even worse between 1986
Yes.
to 2006 because that is when we had
We
the
had
NRA war.
war. Yes.
Leave alone Karamoja being a deportation
Yeah.
site for the colonial masters then,
Yeah.
is that he's saying that even during the NRM government,
It actually started,
there was some really like
because
serious
I
security
can even
issues
say
here.
before the LRA, there was Alice Lekwena. Remember that? There's a lot of highlights we can make. However, I'm not restricting that to be the failure of NRM, because at the end of the day, they championed it. This is where I was going to end my submission. They championed it, and now if you go in the region, there is relative peace. However, still going back to the first question you asked me, comparing Uganda and Tanzania.
But also maybe we should, along the way, break down what peace is, because I think peace is not exactly the absence
It's
of
not the absence of war.
guns and war, but
Yeah.
like are people at peace in their hearts?
You see,
You know,
I
think-
beg
we
that
need
it
to
is
break it
important we
down.
agree with the fact that you cannot discuss peace, and you said it's not about absence of guns.
No, I think
is.
in modern
It is peace.
in modern contemporary times today, with all these human rights, whatever legal frameworks,
Yeah.
you cannot discuss peace just from the point of
But also,
I'm firing
in
a-
this modern time,
comrade,
there are
a gun
countries
at
that
you.
cannot discuss that one.
Yeah, true.
Allow
But you see,
me
yeah.
to make this submission.
Please,
That,
please.
in the absence of war, peace is always the first thing that comes in people's mind. But it's actually not the guarantee. Because you could go in a society, you know, peace is defined by a lot of ingredients. Yeah? And peace is relative, also depends on who is defining it. And in this perspective, for a person who maybe has lived in an area where there is war, it's very easy for them to say, okay, now I have peace because I'm not hearing guns. But however, are you really at peace with whatever is determining your standard of living every day? Your daily life, are you able to access the services that you want? Are you maybe capable of maybe even supporting your own family, your children? Is the standard of living really something that you can sustain? So in my own perspective, I think the NRM has arrived at a very successful point in terms of silencing the guns in Uganda. But in terms of guaranteeing peace and in the continuity, because in where we are now, we still see people in Karamoja starving. We still see people in northern Uganda. We know we have these gang groups There are goals that we always talk about in northern Uganda. In Kampala here, we have had the chiefess
Street children,
situation,
yeah.
the street children. We still have a lot of these petty, crime groups. So in my own opinion, the silence of the gun is something that we have achieved. Silencing the gun, which is also part of, it's actually not, Uganda is not doing this in isolation of international principles. Because I always hear one of the achievements the NRM government likes to claim is that we have given free education. But if you go and check under the Sustainable Development Goals, I think goal 3 or 4, which talks about education.
3 years.
Yeah, under it does not now talk about just providing, going to study, learn. It talks about quality education. So if you're providing books and pens for people to go to school, do they have teachers in the schools? Do they have the services that the school must provide to them? So it's also some of the other discussion that we need to engage in. I don't want to go far from that. Going back to comparing Uganda and not even Uganda and Tanzania only, Uganda, Kenya, Uganda, a lot of countries within the region we can compare. The comparative analysis here is simple. Tanzania is a product of 2 different factions. That is Zanzibar and Tanganyika. So when you combine Tanganyika and Zanzibar, you come out with what now Tanzania, the present day. So you can go to Zanzibar, you go to Dodoma, to Mombasa, these all different places. You will find that the country is moving in a direction. In Uganda's case, I want to think that first, the lack of, belief in our own institutions. We are politically independent as a country, but even after gaining independence, we have actually made our institutions dependent. And the dependence of the institutions depend on, it's reliant on the individual who is seated at the top there. So since Amin came to power, Amin had the privilege to abuse the democratic system of Uganda because all the state institutions were captured. You look at the same thing with Obote. He was abusing the electoral processes and he was promoting all those different sectarian practices because the institutions were not functional. And I could say it's the same thing under the current regime. Because if institutions, the judiciary cannot operate separate from the executive, and the executive have utmost power all over all these different, and yet there's supposed to be a check and balance. It's supposed to be each other supervising the other. So in a system where we do not respect institutions and we do not guarantee the independence of these institutions, you cannot definitely expect the democracy to function at its best. So I cannot compare the democracy in Tanzania with the democracy in Uganda.
Maybe someone can argue that some of the mistakes that we made along the way was, for example, the summary dismissal of the Asians, which Kenya did not do.
Yeah.
I think Kenya, to the contrary, whereas here we were expelling the Asians, Kenyans did not do the same. And that's why you see that elite class allowed the Kenyan economy to continuously grow. Whereas here, Idi Amin sent off these people and gave the economy into hands of people who were maybe not ready at the time. They were not educated enough. Not. Do you think there's a point of contention there?
I don't want to believe in that submission because Idi Amin is way gone, 1979. We are in 2024. Some of the achievements, again, the government can claim 40 years in power now, are being facilitated by the recent trends in globalization. Because, the thing about change is whether you want it or not, it will come. It will happen. So we are in a globalized world where the rate at which countries are interacting is very high. So in terms of interactions between countries and others, the things that were deemed unachievable before are now achievable. The sharing of technology, programming, the exchange programs, the people-to-people interactions, people are now being exposed and being more open-minded. So this regime is able to succeed in an environment that I could consider the same from the time of independence, simply because of the change in the era that we are in now. And also, if I talk about the expulsion of the Indians were expelled, fine, but they are back. Who is the biggest landlord to government right now? I would think it's Sudir. If Uganda wants to host any big event, it's going to be in Munyonyo.
I think it was it around 2000 when Uganda adopted the Expropriated Asians Act or something, which was an attempt to give back the property of the Asians that was taken from them illegally. So I think
they have it actually, and if you compare the population of the Asians in Uganda right now versus the time that they were even existing under Amin, right now I could even say they have more economic abilities than before.
Than they did then.
Yeah, so it is not a matter, but maybe many economists would argue right now one of Uganda's biggest, it could be also the fastest way Uganda is growing, but also the fastest way the local farms are not developing. It's because we have a lot of foreign...
Yeah, because if you look at the category of people who have access to, for example, the most, should I say, expensive, but the most developed education systems, the most expensive healthcare systems. If you're to go to either Aga Khan or you go to, there's this school here, Kampala Parents, the one in
Kampala Parents.
Lugogo.
Yes.
The population there and those who partake of that education are predominantly,
so the Asians.
So they seem to be a class A sort of.
They are the capitalists in the country, and in that perspective, that's why I don't accept that argument that the expulsion of the Indians or wherever else, or the punishment of the intellectuals, wherever else Amin did in this regime, is still an excuse that the present regime should. Amin did not take 10 years in power. The present regime has taken 40 years of those. So 40 years, 5 years in a democratic system, you have 10 years.
It's sufficient enough
less
for you
than
to
8 years, two terms, to fix something.
Yeah.
So I could think correcting the errors from independence to now, again, this is why I will agree with my brother Nimrod to say that it's provident that we could celebrate 40 years of Uganda's independence based on from which period of time that you're going to choose. However, in my perspective, in those 40 years, there are more favorable factors. Maybe the difference between this regime and the previous regimes is that this regime has invested more in intellectual power. This regime has benefited more from the influence of the external powers, of which the same regime came to power using the influence of the external powers. So I also don't understand why it becomes a problem if it is other players who are
benefiting from
the same source.
Foreign powers. Yes,
it's a bit of hypocritical.
Yeah, we are due for a short commercial break, but I mean, it's all about independence, and don't move a muscle. We shall be back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
We'll be back from that short commercial break. So for the next 30 minutes, shall be reading more from the book of Acts than the Book of Lamentations. That means I shall be talking about, beyond 62 years, what should the next 62 years look like for us as a country, and what, should we fix. Nimrod, let's get a bit to the economy. I think that's where I would believe so much interest should be put in. Our economy, whereas we pride of a stable economic growth, is that the gap between the rich and the poor has also continuously become wide.
Yes.
Is that you have a group of people who have access to the factors of production, they own the land. Then you have a largely impoverished group of people. And that's where the young people are. So with the demographic dividend, you've seen the preliminary results from the census night, is that you have a very young country. So, and of course, therein issues of unemployment come in. So 62 years and beyond, there are things that we should not be talking about. Issues like access to health, issues like access to quality education. But let's first talk about the economy. What needs to be done for us to get the economy to where we want it to be?
Thank you. As I said from the beginning, that I chose to celebrate Uganda 40 years, not 62 years. Its economy is one of them. It's a very, very painful thing when we start talking about the economy. That the whole of the first 30 years since we gained independence, we're talking about an economy that managed to only achieve around the GDP of $3 billion. But later today, we are talking about an economy that has tremendously grown to a point of around, $60 billion today, according to, World Bank statistics. Getting back to your question of the economic gap, the economic gap between the rich and the poor. The recent statistics from the World Bank indicate clearly that Uganda actually is at the low level of a middle-income status country, with an annual per capita GDP of around $1,083, per annum. This is something we must celebrate. But what has created the gap, in my opinion, is that when President Museveni took over the country, he agreed with liberalization of the economy, a private-led economy, an economy that it is a laissez-faire, free to come and free to exit. Why? Because you had learned that Uganda was stuck in a capitalism economy. When you look at the Obote socialism and the Aminist capitalism, you realize the country trajectory economically was stuck there. That a Nimrod who has his money, he cannot take over and build a school that is a social good for the people, because it is purely a government business to ensure that we have good schools. That I know that I have capacity to put up a hospital, that I can make money, but also give a social good to the people. But because I'm restricted. So the President Museveni, in his wisdom, he said, no, for us to grow as a country, can't we do a private-led economy? And you can see where it has led us. Yes, I agree that it has.
Talking about the structure adjustment programs that came with, the private sector, the economy, liberalization,
now the adjustment programs that come in, they come to reduce on the gap. I'll give you an example. Because it's a private-led economy, you realize that's what easily creates that gap of the rich and the poor, and the resources that people will only invest where they think they are high returns. And there are those certain groups that will be left behind because no one is talking about them. But the government has so deliberately brought those programs to ensure that even those that people are not investing in, how can we get them also uplifted? They'd say, bring something, give them, let them also do private input in the economy so that they grow their disposable income. When you look at the wealth creation programs that government has tried, is to all reduce on the gap to the current PDM, the grow projects that are trying to make sure that they reduce on the gap. I can tell you I'm a beneficiary of the PDM. Yeah? from my village circle in Namisi,
Namisi,
sub-county Mahonge village. In that place, with the certain young people who went and got the money, the 1 million from government, those are like me who have chosen to invest that money. I mean, I see what is happening in my life, and those that have chosen to do the right thing with that money. That even if I didn't go to school, that I cannot access government employment or a good job, at least I have that money to start my goat farming, to start my chicken farming, and I'm getting something from it, and I'm surviving. That's about reducing the gap. So I think there's something to celebrate very highly in terms of the economy, that whereas we are living in a liberalized economy, in a private-led economy.
Do you want to speak about our debt somewhere there?
Yes, the statistics are clear. The current report from the World Bank still indicates that the debt pattern of this country, in terms of management, we are at 37.
I think what's our debt?
And that was
is it 80 trillion already?
Yeah.
yes, we are now at 79 trillion, but people can talk about 80 trillion. But also, what you should not look at is not the 88 trillion or the 90 trillion. What you should look at is the country's capacity to deal with its debt. That should be your center of discussion. Why?
Nimrod,
when the country, let me finish this point very clearly for our viewers.
If the capacity was there,
yes,
why has the debt continuously grown then?
My capacity is that
because if you have capacity, then you are managing it and you are reducing it.
You see,
but yet it's just growing.
You're a lawyer. I'm an economist. A country capacity to deal with its debts is not about what it has. It's about what it is having in store in terms of its trajectory to deal with the problems they have in terms of debt management. Uganda was ranked one of the best countries in debt management before COVID, and we're starting at 52% at debt management. That any country could give us money because we had the capacity that we can deal. The chances of us dealing with that debt were at 52%.
Do you know why? Because
now,
we have borrowed most of that money, mortgaging our oil, which is still in the ground, and that is why there's that facade. No, I'm telling you. No. I in fact listened to a report from Bank of Uganda that one of the reasons as to why Uganda has access to credit is because of the potential of the oil coming out of the ground.
Which we should celebrate.
But even that oil, you know that Uganda has less than 15% of the profit shares.
Let me finish my point. We shall get to that. I was saying about our capacity to manage our debt. That now, after COVID, COVID really destroyed us. And that's now we are starting at 38% debt management. That this country has capacity at 38% to manage its debts. For the country to be put at a red flag, it must be at 27%, and Kenya is there. So many countries are there. That this country, you cannot put your money there because they are at a very low level of managing their debt. And that's 27. We are not yet there. Meaning that this country, if we manage our resources very well, we are still very okay in terms of managing our debts. Even if we were talking about 90 trillions, I know some people even cut figures that every Uganda has demanded 3 million shillings. I mean, I keep laughing. Do they know what exactly happens? So what happens here is that Ugandan, as a country, we still have resources to deal with our debt problem. That's why I'm saying our economy, when we just deal with infrastructure problems,
wasteful expenditure.
Yes, wasteful expenditure. We are ranked among the fast growing economies in the African continent. Actually, for your information, we are the third fast growing economies on the African continent. Sure. And that's why Uganda won an award.
I need to finish.
And that's why
with those details.
Yes, these are statistics.
The source is the NRM Secretariat.
No, these sources are on all over internet. You can Google, you can prove You can actually, as we speak, you can Google and you see where did Uganda win an award of the best investment destination this year from the Arab.
It was in Dubai.
Yes, you know it. Because of this, that we have what it takes to attract investors. You know that we are talking about 70 industries before 1986. Today we're talking about 5,000 plus industries in this country.
But now the question therein is that are they multinationals or they are indigenous industries? Are they being owned and run by Ugandans?
That can be a discussion.
Or they are for Aga Khan, they are for
the question is, what are they doing for this economy?
No,
I think that should be the
they're taking away money from our economy. There is capital flight. There is capital flight.
Yes. I want us to discuss. You see, when we were in a state after independence, before 86, you viewers, we're struggling to access basic needs like salt, like soap, like sugar, like milk. Yeah. Today we are talking about surplus availability of basic needs. You see,
And also
you take
inflation
this for
at the same
granted.
time. Surplus, but also inflation.
We don't have. We are managing inflation up to the level.
Do
of
you
less
know
than
the price
three.
of those commodities right now on the market?
Yes.
They
The prices doesn't
they are
mean
very
inflation.
no.
I
They're
mean,
excusing
comrade.
themselves using
Okay,
your
I am-
comrade.
These are statistics.
I am not an economist, yes.
Yes, allow me
But
to
at
tell
least
you
I
this.
know that
Eh,
inflation has a direct implication on the prices of commodities.
Now, let me
Yes.
tell you this. Can I?
Please.
Thank you. Inflation is managed under debit units. When you look at the inflation of this country, you can go our shillings, compare its stability with the dollar. Yeah? You realize this country, we have managed, even these things are always released quarterly by Ministry of Finance and Bank of Uganda on how we are managing our inflation. We are still at managing inflation actually than the expected. We are at 3-digit unit inflation rate management. The worst is actually at this level of these middle income countries, most of them at 5.7 digit, 5.71 digit units, but we are 3, meaning we are so good in managing inflation. But the question is what causes these prices? That can be discussed in issues of demand. It's because we're living in a private-led economy. Yeah? And the honest thing is that we must call for government intervention when it comes to basics.
Regulation.
On regulation of prices. But the only problem is this country cannot go there. And that's why this government has not done that. On managing the issues of prices, because of demand and supply, is because we have liberalized the economy. If I come with my money, I invest it, and I'm a monopoly, I'll determine my rates. That's the problem. As I conclude, there are things we are taking for granted. That this economy that is now availing every basic need for Ugandans. When you move here to Sudan here, you realize that for them to see salt, some communities there, it's a high level of excitement. Soap like this, high level of excitement. These are things that some Ugandans may take for granted because they are available. But the economies, even in Congo, that struggle with accessing basic needs. So I think as we celebrate the economy that has availed us, that even have surplus sugar, on the market that we're giving our friends, So I think it is important as we celebrate this years of independence, we celebrate that from 1986, at least we can access basic needs as Ugandans.
Okay.
I think it's worth the celebration.
Fair enough. Carlos, you've had Nimrod. Is it we don't desire for better, or we are comfortable where we are? Because if in 62 years the yardstick of our economy is on access to salt, and yet modern economies are talking about technology, Internet of Things, and how do we have
artificial intelligence?
Yes. So
Yes.
is it because we are not ambitious as a people?
I feel sad that we are young people here, and this is our ambition. Unfortunately, we should be dreaming and thinking bigger than this. The bare minimum of any human being is access to their daily necessities. That's the bare minimum. It cannot be the pride of a government. As a government, when you people are able to access their basic necessities as food, shelter, water, dressing, whatever it is, that is the bare minimum. So first, as a country, we cannot also put our ambition or weigh ourselves against those who are not really so much desired. For example, Uganda cannot benchmark on South Sudan as a measure of weighing where it has reached. If you're a progressive country, you should be looking at those who are there, up there.
Singapore,
you look at the present-day China, you look at the present-day, Indonesia. These are countries that are pushing ahead.
but also that we're at the same
They
level.
were at the same level
with us.
where we are.
In which year?
I think
I actually
1962.
Yeah.
No,
Singapore
that's good. Let me
Singapore's
just say
economy
this.
was
Let me
almost
just say
the
this.
same as
As
ours.
you compare that, put in mind that you should look at the history of what happened between that in Singapore 60 years later, in terms of their political stability and what happened to Uganda. Go ahead.
What I'm trying to tell you here is one of the strongest countries. I get tired of giving this example. One of the powerful countries in the world now is China. 1949, and 49 to now, it's unrecognizable where it is. One of my Asian friends that I studied with used to ask me a question that, Carlos, what can the rest of the world learn from the story of Africa? That 60, 70 years of independence, Africa still remains that continent that is the bigger continent. You compare Africa with Asian countries that have, some of them have had very bad history. Some of them were not actually colonized by one country like Uganda, who were only colonized by the British. Some of them had series of, colonial people, and it was won in battles of, blood and iron.
Yes.
But these countries are so far no longer in that state.
They took off a long while ago.
And now we are looking at them, but at some point they were worse than us. And what do we have as Uganda that maybe we don't realize that we have? For example, something that if you go out of this country, you learn to appreciate is, one, we have a very favorable climatic condition. And we pride over being a country that is, having agriculture as our backbone. So that means even our weather alone actually favors our agricultural practices. It's only a small mandate of empowering those who are doing the practices. However, if you compare our agricultural produce in the world market, we are still not yet up there. So it just tells you one thing, that as a country, we should be aiming higher. We should be embracing the things, like I said, this current regime has a lot to claim in terms of achievement, simply because it has actually been facilitated and aided by the recent trends in global development. That the globalization has introduced technology. The globalization has introduced new, better ideas, new, programs that could actually easily, help a government to foster its development. So in Uganda right now, let's not cover this up. What are our biggest challenges to our economic progress? We have a massive level of corruption. We have high level of unemployment. We pride over having young people who are less than 35 years, but it is okay. In developing countries, sometimes the population is a burden to the government because the population is dependent on the government. But in a country where maybe the population is empowered, people have invested in innovations, technology, and they are the ones who are devising solutions to problems that are affecting a country, the population is an advantage to a government. So for our case, the unemployment level is extreme because the young people go to schools. We're still studying in a colonial education system. We're still having syllabus and the curriculum that is designed by the colonial master, which was predominantly to read and write and understand when they're talking to us. But why am I studying about Tennessee Valley in wherever in the US when I don't even know about River Achwa in northern Uganda, where I come from? So this whole kind of education system that we keep promoting is the reason why we are, so it all goes back to the policymakers. So when I talk of high unemployment level, I talk of high level of corruption, misappropriation of resources, maybe what else can I talk about in terms of economy? The inflation that my brother does not want to touch, and the local farms that are not being, promoted because they are being outcompeted by the different foreign agencies. We have talked about, is it nationalization? We have actually gone ahead to privatize. So the privatization, we have promoted a capitalistic sort of economy where private individuals who have the capacity to establish farms are more powerful than individuals. So these individuals, majority of them who are people who based on maybe hand-to-mouth sort of businesses, the roadside street vendors and all these different people, they cannot survive in an economy where it's set up predominantly for the big shots to thrive. So this is where we will continue to fail as a country. However, if we could develop an economic approach that works within our environment without necessarily copying from entirely abroad, it would mean that we can then try to delve into some approaches that are, customized to practically work within our local structures. For example, I can give you countries that have reached there very fast. I gave you an example of Indonesia. I will still give you an
Sukarno, I know they are their independence leader.
Yeah, so these are countries that they customize their development, even in terms of governance, they customize what works within their system without necessarily, all these things we are waiting for World Bank to determine how far we have developed. We are waiting for World Bank to give us statistics to convince us whether we are progressing as a country or
IMF.
These financial institutions don't exist to solve our problems.
Okay, then let's break it down to household income.
Yeah.
How many Ugandans today are able to afford, beyond the basic needs, how many are able to afford quality education, quality health care? I think that should be a good yardstick for us to begin from. But also, how many of them have the surplus capital to invest and begin to actually make money and begin to participate in the money economy? I think for now, the issues such as their participation meaningfully in the economy is still wanting. Because,
it's why I think the NRM government here will give it credit. They are trying to come out with resolutions to such problems, like he has talked of the PDM, the Parish Development Model. We have seen Operation Wealth Creation. We have seen all these different mechanisms that they are putting in place. However, the issue is, when it comes to the implementation of these programs...
But are you in terms of principle, are you in support of that way of economic transformation? Let us give 1 million here, 1 million here.
I think
because
this is
Nimrod mentioned, I think, Bonaba Gagawale in Tandikwa. We have had multiple of them phasing in and phasing out. And we continue to, do the same thing, expecting different results. So, is it what Singapore did? Is it what Kenya did?
The simple question, the answer here is, first of all, no. It's not what they did. Here we are gambling. I could call it gambling because we don't learn from the past mistakes. And like you said, same things but different, they come in different faces. Or they just go and rebrand, they name it differently, they change the nomenclature and it comes back in a different form. But we are failing to learn from, what we have already failed at. And secondly, also, the fact that I think we don't have a proper track record of our economic approaches. Because if we have a proper track record, we could know that because we tried PDM, maybe it has failed. If we want to do PDM but in a different form,
just a question. How much money does government put to PDM every financial year or every quarter?
2.1 trillion.
2.1 trillion. No. That money, if put in Uganda Development Bank, I would rather have that money put in UDB and have someone like Ham access it and expand his enterprise and create more opportunities, rather than dividing it into small 1 million for.
I think in this perspective, I agree with you. It's a product of our politics, because during our political practices, still what drives the Ugandans to even elect a person is exactly this same, throwing lumps of sugar at people. Small things that excite them, and then they don't know they have sacrificed the next 5 years for only the amount that the person is giving them at that. So it has been now something that Ugandans have become accustomed to. That when you give me something tangible that I'm able to see, Ugandans are not people who project ahead. And this is all a behavior that has been promoted by the same system. So if a system is used to, giving people ready-made, they say it's better give me a hook and I do my own fishing than give me fish, because tomorrow I'll come back and ask for more fish. But if you give me a hook tomorrow, I will go do my own fishing. This is what our government is not doing to us. So Ugandans being given money in this economy, for example, 2 million is nothing in Uganda. It's some money, Kidega. I don't know how much you spend, but I'm sure that is money you can waste in a very short period of time.
That is not true, my brother. Is it of money to but I get your point that 1 million for someone to go and invest it in a reasonable business might be asking for too much.
To survive in an environment where small farms are not really thriving.
But also, but also, let's speak about the policies around the regulatory frameworks. I have run a business before, and I can assure you, you open your business today, less than a month later on, URA is coming at your doorstep, finding you with, customs duty and all those things. So does our tax regime, does our regulatory framework allow for domestic businesses to thrive? Are there sufficient incentives that government has put in place to allow multiple businesses to mushroom on their own? Because look at the cost of credit in Uganda. 24% interest by commercial banks.
That's really a lot.
There is no way someone is going to borrow that money and pay it on in time. It's impossible. All right? Why? Because you have a government that is also borrowing from commercial banks. So the commercial banks have given out their liquid capital to government, and now they are short of liquid cash, and therefore what they have left now becomes very competitive.
I want to quote Semuju Uganda. He's a very comic man. I like him for whatever he says. Semuju once said on the floor of parliament that in every financial year, maybe every budget that Uganda releases out, the entire budget goes to pay debts. And then for them to run the next financial year, they must run and borrow money again. So an entire economic calendar is being run on
debt.
Borrowed money, debts. And by the way, this actually will allow me to touch on that perspective. Earlier, he said we should not focus on the debt, when we was talking about the 79. We cannot cover that because this is a problem being procrastinated. It is generational. It's not going to be this government that is going to solve this debts that we have, and the debt burden is shifting.
No, you've gone far, Carlos. Look at the political problem that Ruto is dealing with. It is a debt that he
accumulated.
Inherited from the previous almost 2-3 regimes. So debt is as bad to the extent that it can cost a government.
It is immoral.
If you don't deal with it.
It is immoral. And in my perspective, we cannot operate as a country depending so heavily on debt. And yet, at the same time, we accept that a debt should be something that should be an unavoidable circumstance. For example, you can borrow money. What is the purpose of IMF and World Bank? These institutions, by the way, they were not established for our interests as Africa.
Bretton Woods.
They were, established for the economic stabilization after the Great Economic Depression. So when these countries finally succeeded at whatever they were trying to achieve by then stabilize, World Bank, what it gives you is long-term, stability. But IMF gives you short-term stabilization. So long-term development and short-term stabilization. So countries that have gone into war like South Sudan, they run to IMF, get money. And then long-term long-term development, roads, infrastructure, World Bank. So this whole system, even the percentage at which you pay back the money to them, for African countries who are relatively more, fragile or vulnerable, they have a higher rate than member states. So is it something that was designed for us to benefit from? No, it is something, maybe it's a continuation of colonial, new colonialism right now. So for us to pride over, that thing, it's more dangerous for us to go and borrow than to keep. And then the last thing I want to say is the cost of minerals in a country. We have been priding over having oil and all that in Uganda, but it's also the reason why we are having confidence to go and borrow money. And the same cost of mineral is the reason why a country that is very mineralized, very endowed in terms of resources as DRC, is not progressing, it's not developing up to now where it is. Because if minerals are in the wrong hands, the allocation and the practice, or maybe the extraction of it, is not being done by the government, the local government itself, or the central government. It's being given to foreign bodies. The benefit to the country can only be in rumors.
Wow, interesting. Nimrod, still on the economy, what is the way forward? Do we continue with the PDM approach, or we say we are going to go the hard way. Let us put this money in Uganda Development Bank. If you want money, young or not, go and borrow it and you repay it back. So what economic model moving forward?
Thank you. The fathers of this country, mostly President Museveni, his dreams and desires was, let's have a private-led economy of where we liberalize the economy, make it a less fair, and see how it goes. Of course, later, it perturbed him to say, how do we create wealth for every individual, for every household? And that's why he came up with all these programs to see how to deal with that problem he created himself on private-led economy. I agree that as much as the money is being put in public, it's not the absolute solution for our economic challenges. Actually, our economic challenges start from the attitude, to the infrastructure, to the policies, and to the system. So I think for us, we need to overhaul the whole system, in my opinion. That as young leaders, we must be challenged on how to deal with the correct infrastructure for our economy. For an economy to progress, let me tell you one thing. In Bulambuli district, Sebei, they know that they produce the highest matoke in this country. But that matoke never reaches Kampala. Most of them is sold to Kenya. Why? Because of the infrastructure that perhaps them to move those goods to this side. So to have the correct infrastructure for economy, the market, I mean the whole system of the economy, I think it's something we need to invest in. Before we start discussing whether to throw away which program, I think we first create an environment for economies to thrive. You have seen that in Cafe Javas today, they don't serve tea bags of Ugandan teas. Yeah? You have gone there, you will see tea bags branded Kenya. What are we government doing? Which posts are there to protect this Ugandans who are investing in tea? That they cannot use their teas in the modern restaurants in this country. So I think the policies, the infrastructure, the systems, and the attitude of people, and having a niche as a country, what defines us economically? What is our competitive advantage on the world market?
It used to be coffee.
I mean, and it used to be the three C's, which I think is wrong, in my opinion, because of so many reasons that we have not mechanized as a country. Let me tell you, we did research on maize. You see just maize? Maize as a product can transform this economy fully. Why? It is easier to grow, easier to maintain, and an available market. All that is available for us. But how do we talk to farmers? How do we get market? The whole of the East African region, Uganda is their basket in terms of food. But we have not used that advantage to our absolute. Cassava, you see, a product called cassava. It is established that can bring in trillions of dollars to this economy. Research conducted by Nimrod. And that's the easiest crop that can be grown. The issue of coffee, cotton, the three C's, I think we must outgrow that and get back to what is our niche economy? What defines this country in terms of economy? Where do we invest? There are countries we know that whenever you want to get this, you go to that country. They have the best because they established that and they focus on that. Because we cannot be good at manufacturing. We can't compete. In terms of manufacturing, industrial, we can't compete. Where is our competitive advantage? Agriculture. In agriculture, what are we exactly doing? So in terms of economy, as we conclude, I think it's important that we deal with the infrastructure, we deal with the system policies, we deal with the attitude of farmers and sensitization. If we do that, then we can talk about capital, we can talk about money in the world, in banks. Because even if we have all that in the money in the bank, it will be accessed by few who have capacity. And the rest still, the gap will not be solved.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's have parting shots in just 2 minutes each. Just look to the camera and tell us, give us your independence message.
Thank you, first of all, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss with you, colleagues. I just have this perspective that since 1962 to where we are, as a country, we have actually moved well, and I want to think where we are now is not by mistake, it's a product of our own making. Could we have done better? That is another question for another day. But so far, Uganda has actually achieved a lot. in terms of international interactions alone, Uganda is now considered a destination for so many people in terms of tourism. Uganda is looked at as a destination for many international events. We have seen this year alone, starting with Nana Line movement. We have gone to the Commonwealth Speakers Conference. We have had the judiciary, and so many other different international bodies being organized to, have their occasions held in Uganda. So this gives us hope going forward that as a country, there is only room for improvement. And as a country, we could still maybe achieve a lot more towards the next independence celebration. And my message is simple, that independence is a very complex word to define and depends on who is defining it also sometimes. As Africa, we entirely cannot claim that we are independent because we still rely a lot on foreign influence. We rely a lot on the external intrusion in our domestic affairs. And that tells you that we cannot have our own people always deciding things that are best for their own local people. However, I have hope that as a young African leader or as a young African hopeful, I know that tomorrow is going to be a better one, and I'm very happy that we have people who are discussing ways in which the country can move ahead. And I'm always happy to be here. I am very thankful. You could always look out for me in the diplomacy platform. We can always catch up there. But thank you, Comrade Kidega, for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Yes, Nimrod, your parting shots.
Thank you, our listeners, our viewers, for being patient with our discussion here today. I think, and I agree, that for us to have absolute independence, it is a journey that we can continue moving from now, the current and new colonialism. As I said from the start, I start celebrating this independence from 1986. I congratulate this government for ensuring that there is a semblance of independence in all spheres of humanity, politically, culturally, social, and economically. As we join all goodwill Ugandans to celebrate today, let's think about what could be ahead of us in the next 100 years. Where do you want Uganda to be? You as you, what's your contribution to the Uganda you desire to see? If we see that as Ugandans, we can be happy that in next years when we're celebrating maybe a century of independence, we shall have something substantive to talk about or to look at very well. But I thank Civic Space and Comrade Kidega for always giving us an opportunity to come here and share with us. For all the goodwill Ugandans, join us. We're in Busia to celebrate independence, to talk about the things deeply and agree or disagree. Thank you so much and see you next time. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Carlos and Nimrod, for your time. Of course, to all the viewers who have made the time on this particular Independence Day, we thank you for joining us and, of course, join the country in celebrating our 62 years of independence. But as we do so, let's ponder upon the, intrinsic meaning of the word independence, and we, look at it from the political, social, and economic perspective, whether indeed we are independent, not just as a matter of form, but also as a matter of substance. Until next week, same time, same place, have a lovely Independence Day and lovely Independence month of October. Bye-bye.